Tonight's story is proof that a quiet trip into the woods can hide something far more terrifying than you could ever imagine. And I should know, because my name is Trevor Canning, and what I experienced one winter night in a forgotten cabin deep in the Appalachians has haunted me ever since. I'd heard of the place from a friend, one of those whispered recommendations that sounded more like a dare than a travel tip. Cheap, private, off the grid, perfect for writing. At the time, I thought it was exactly what I needed. Isolation, a chance to unplug, a place where no one would bother me. But I'll be honest with you now. If you're a fan of the strange, the dark, and the mysterious told in story form, then you've found the right place. Because what I'm about to tell you isn't just another campfire tale. It's a warning wrapped in memory. And I wouldn't wish this night on anyone. Before we get too far, I'll say this. Hit subscribe, because you'll want to hear every twisted step of this, and you'll want to remember never to repeat what I did. It was December, cold enough to make your breath feel like it froze the moment it left your lips, the kind of cold that creeps into your bones and makes your fingers stiff on the steering wheel. I had been driving for hours along winding mountain roads, my phone signal long gone, the GPS frozen on a patch of green that offered no hint of where I really was. The directions I'd printed from an old message board had grown damp from the condensation on my car's dash, the ink smudged, and with every mile marker I passed, I felt like I was entering a stretch of country time itself had abandoned. The trees pressed in closer the deeper I went, skeletal branches leaning over the road like they were trying to claw at my headlights. A thin mist followed me, catching in the beams and making every turn look the same. By the time I reached the cabin, night had already fallen. The building slouched at the edge of a clearing, its roof patched with mismatched tin, its porch swing swaying even though the air was still. My first thought was that it looked like something out of a postcard sent by someone who wanted to keep you away, not invite you in. The key was exactly where I'd been told it would be, under a rusted horseshoe nailed upside down to the porch rail, a detail that should have struck me as a bad omen, but at the time I told myself it was just local charm. Inside, the place smelled of damp timber and smoke, the walls scarred with old nail holes and carvings, initials maybe, or symbols that made my eyes ache if I looked too long. On the kitchen table sat a mason jar full of coarse salt, a black metal flashlight that looked older than I was, and a single folded note written in shaky pencil. Circle your bed with salt, keep the stove lit, if the Bible is open when you didn't open it, close it fast, and if you hear knocking, count to 7 and answer only on 6. The handwriting had dug grooves into the paper, like whoever wrote it wanted to warn me badly enough to nearly tear through. I laughed nervously, because what else can you do in a moment like that? But when I looked toward the small iron stove in the corner, it gave a long, hollow sigh, like it had been waiting for me. Outside, the forest had gone silent. No birds, no wind, no insects, just the heavy hush of snow pressing down on everything. I should have left then. I should have turned back while I still could. But instead, I unpacked my bag, poured a shaky ring of salt on the floor around the bed, and told myself I'd sleep fine. I didn't realize then that in this cabin, rules weren't suggestions. They were the only reason you ever saw the morning. The first signs that something wasn't right in that cabin came quietly, like the place was testing how much I'd noticed before it decided to show me its teeth. And I'll admit, at first I brushed them off as tricks of my tired mind, but the more they stacked up, the more I realized the rules weren't written for superstition. They were written for survival. I woke sometime after midnight, the fire in the stove snapping like knuckles in the silence, and for a moment I thought the sound had woken me. But no, it was the creak of the porch swing moving outside when I knew the air had been still all night. I told myself it was wind, yet when I leaned closer to the frosted window, my breath fogging the glass, the swing moved slower than any breeze could push, deliberate, like a pendulum counting down. I backed away and sat on the bed, the salt ring glowing faintly in the lamplight, and tried to focus on the rhythm of the fire. But that was when I noticed the Bible on the mantel was no longer closed. It lay open, pages stiff and yellow, a sprig of some dried herb pressing the book to Judges, a verse about being surrounded in the night. I hadn't touched it, and the thought that maybe I had absent-mindedly flipped it made my hands sweat, because deep down I knew I hadn't. The second sign came not long after. My camera,
The one I brought to document the trip refused to take a proper picture of anything inside. Shots of the kitchen came back blurry, my face turned pale and washed out like a ghost, and even the table where the salt jar had been showed only a bright smudge, as if the lens was trying to erase proof the place existed. I switched to video and caught nothing but static, though when I replayed the clip there was a sound underneath, the faint rhythm of someone knocking. Slow, patient, and waiting. The third and final sign sealed it for me. Around 2 in the morning, when I'd almost convinced myself I could sleep, the stove ticked out and the room chilled instantly, as if every bit of warmth had been pulled straight from my bones. I shot up, fumbling for the matches, and in that half second of darkness, I heard something move under the floor. Not scurrying, not a rat. It was a dragging, a careful slide of weight across the beams, like someone crawling on elbows, slow and determined, circling directly under where I stood. When the flame caught again, the sound stopped, but the boards under my bare feet still trembled with memory. I dumped 3 logs into the stove, sparks spitting back at me like the fire knew I had almost failed it, and when the light steadied, I saw that the salt ring had shifted. A gap no bigger than the width of a coin had appeared by the bedpost, as if something had leaned close enough to disturb it without stepping through. I dropped to my knees, pouring more salt with shaking hands until the circle was whole again, my chest rattling as I tried to steady my breathing. That was when I remembered the note. If you hear knocking, count to 7 and answer only on 6. The words dug into my mind like hooks. I realized then that the knocking in the recording wasn't random. It had been counting, waiting for me to respond. I told myself I wouldn't, that I wasn't that stupid. But when the next knock came, soft, polite, against the window frame, I caught myself whispering, 1, 2, 3, before I bit my tongue so hard it drew blood. Something on the other side of the glass scraped, like nails against wood, then went silent. That was the night I understood the cabin wasn't just old timber and smoke. It was listening. It was watching. And it wanted me to play by its rules, or break them, so it could show me what waited when the fire died and the salt failed. By the second night, I had no illusions left that this was just an old cabin with creaky boards and mountain folklore, because the strangeness grew teeth, and I could feel it circling closer with every hour I stayed. The day had been gray and damp, fog draped across the ridge like a quilt stitched to block out the sun, and I thought maybe I'd be safer outside in daylight, but the woods proved me wrong. I followed a narrow path downhill, hoping to find the creek I'd heard faintly the night before, and that's when I saw them. Footprints, half melted in the mud, bare, human-shaped, but wrong, too long, the toes spread like hands, and they climbed uphill against the grade as though whoever made them didn't believe in gravity. My chest locked when I realized the prints led straight back to the cabin. By the time I turned, the fog had thickened and the cabin stood far closer than it had any right to be, as though the woods had folded around me and carried me back. On the porch rail lay another note that hadn't been there when I left, written in the same gouging pencil as the first. If you see lights in the laurel, don't meet them halfway. They love arithmetic. My stomach turned cold. Back inside, the Bible was open again, this time to a blank page that had no business being there, and across it was a rubbing in faint graphite. Stairs, 6 of them. The last one darker, like more weight had rested there. That night, the real horror revealed itself. The fire burned steady, the salt ring was whole, but the knocking began again, slow, measured, always in groups of 6, at first on the door, then the walls, then the floor, until I realized with a sick jolt that it was moving under the bed. I held my breath, staring at the salt, and for a long time it seemed to hold, but then I watched one crystal shiver, then another, and before I could react, the gap opened again by the bedpost, a slit of bare floor. The knocking stopped, and in its place came a new sound, breathing, not mine, not ragged, not panicked, but steady, deliberate, like someone had been waiting their turn to exhale. I didn't dare move. The air smelled of iron, damp, and something sweet and sour, all at once, like vinegar poured over old stone. Then came the sight that froze me, and the dark pane of the window just beyond the circle of firelight, 2 small orbs glowed. Not lanterns, not animal eyes. They didn't flicker, they didn't move, they just waited. A pair of watching lights level with my bed. My skin tightened as if every nerve had been pulled taut. I remembered the note, answer only on 6, and felt the weight of the choice pressing down. The knocks returned, louder now, shaking the timbers, rattling the stove door. I counted aloud against my own will, each number slipping out in a cracked whisper. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and on 6, the lights outside blinked in unison, and the knock came from inside the wall, inches from my ear. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. I forced myself to throw another log into the stove, and the burst of sparks caught the corner of the room in sudden light. For the briefest second, the wall beside me rippled, like muscle under skin, like something pressed too hard from the other side. Then the glow vanished, the breathing stopped, and the silence roared so loud it felt like it could crush me flat. I stayed awake until dawn, staring at the salt circle, terrified that if I closed my eyes, the thing on the other side of the wood would finish its count and step into my room.
By the third night, exhaustion weighed heavier than fear, but the cabin didn't care if I was tired. It cared only that I followed its rules. And the more I obeyed them, the more I understood they weren't written for show. They were written because something in those mountains thrived on numbers and cracks and moments of weakness. I tried to convince myself during daylight that it was just isolation warping my senses, that I'd imagine the eyes and the breathing, but then I'd find proof left behind like trophies I hadn't asked for. The salt jar a little lighter than I remembered, the Bible closing itself, the Polaroid of the cabin I'd found tucked in a drawer now showing the man on the porch holding up 3 fingers instead of 2. Every time I blinked, the rules explained themselves louder. Keep the stove lit. Easy enough, except the wood pile seemed smaller than when I first arrived, even though I hadn't burned that much. Circle the bed with salt. Simple, except no matter how neat I poured it, there was always one point where the line threatened to thin, and that was always where I felt watched the hardest. If the Bible is open when you didn't open it, close it fast. Each time I shut it, the page it chose felt more deliberate. First warnings of encirclement, then passages about sacrifices, then eventually blank leaves where graphite scratches mapped staircases to nowhere. And the worst rule, the one I hated most, if you hear knocking, count to 7 and answer on 6. I told myself I'd never answer, but when the knocking came again, this time from inside the walls, circling like a predator testing a pen, I found my lips moving against my will, each number dragged out of me like thread pulled from cloth, until on 6 my throat locked and a voice answered back, repeating the count in perfect imitation of me. I nearly tore the salt ring open running to the stove to stoke the fire, and the flames jumped higher, spitting sparks as though they too were afraid of being smothered. That was when I realized the cabin didn't just want to frighten me, it wanted me to participate, to keep playing its arithmetic. Because every time I spoke, every time I obeyed, I fed it something I couldn't get back. The bottle tree outside, with its blue glass throats, had started humming on its own, even when the air was dead still, and each hum came in 6-note phrases, over and over, like a lullaby for something that lived in the dark timber bones of the house. I found myself counting without meaning to, steps across the floor, the number of logs by the door, even my own breaths, and it terrified me how natural it was becoming. That night I doubled the salt, closed the Bible twice, and fed the fire until the pipe glowed red, but the cabin still found its way in. Around midnight, the trapdoor in the kitchen, the one I'd noticed only the night before, creaked open just enough to let a smell crawl out. Wet soil, rusted coins, and something faintly sweet like rotting fruit. I pressed my ear to the salt ring, listening, and I swear I heard counting beneath the floor, whispered and patient, always stopping on 6. I wanted to believe dawn would save me, that daylight had power over whatever prowled these hills. But even the mornings were different now. The fog never fully lifted, my watch ticked in loops, and when I tried to take a photo of the clearing to prove to myself the outside world still existed, the screen went white, blank as paper, as if the cabin had erased its own reflection. By then, I wasn't asking if something was here with me. I was asking how long it had been waiting for someone like me to arrive. The 5th night broke me, because that was when the cabin stopped hinting and finally showed me just how close the thing inside it could get. And for the first time, I understood the rules weren't just superstitions, they were boundaries, fragile and temporary, like chalk lines a child draws against a storm.
The air dropped colder than I'd ever felt, colder than the snow outside. And when I checked the stove, I found the flames smothered under ash, though I had stacked fresh logs before lying down. I panicked, fumbling for matches, and that was when I heard the sound under the floor again, not dragging this time, not patient, pounding, furious, a body slamming against beams as if it meant to crock them open. I struck match after match, my hands shaking, but the flame wouldn't catch, each spark dying in a puff of smoke. And in that choking darkness, the knocking started, surrounding me, door to wall to floor to ceiling, faster now, insistent. And my mouth moved against my will, whispering the count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And on 6, the boards under my bed split with a scream of wood, and something pressed through, a shape I couldn't fully see but could feel in every nerve. Thin, jointed, too many elbows, pressing upward as if it meant to peel me from the salt ring. I scrambled to the kitchen, tore the trapdoor shut with my whole weight, and that was when the radio, dead for days, roared to life with static and a child's voice spelling letters in that broken language again, the rhythm pounding against my ears until the syllables snapped into a word I couldn't repeat without losing myself. The Polaroid on the mantel slipped from its frame and landed at my feet, and the man who had once held up 3 fingers now showed 6, his smile stretched too wide, too knowing. I threw every match into the stove at once, my hands blistering from the heat, and finally, the flames caught, bursting high with a crack like bone breaking. The pounding stopped, the boards groaned back into place, but something had already crossed. I could smell it, that sour vinegar stench of something alive, but wrong. And when I looked at the salt ring, I saw it trembling, the crystals sliding inward as if pulled by breath. Then the fire flared brighter, and I saw them. Eyes. Dozens of them pressed into the grain of the walls, glowing faintly as if lit from behind, each one fixed on me, each one blinking out of sync until the whole room looked like it was breathing with sight. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. All I could do was whisper my own name over and over, trying to remind myself I was real. Trevor Canning. Trevor Canning. The thing in the floor answered once, in my voice, perfect and mocking, and then it went still. The silence that followed was worse than the knocking had ever been. My ears rang with it, my blood felt thin, and every lamp flickered as if one by one they considered giving up. But the fire held, roaring stubborn, and I collapsed to the floor beside it, clutching the salt jar like it was a holy relic, knowing now that the cabin had let me survive this night only because it wanted me to see just how thin the line between inside and outside had become. I lay there until the first pale light of morning, too afraid to blink, too afraid to count, and with the rising sun came a thought I couldn't shake. I hadn't beaten the cabin. I had only been added to its arithmetic. By the 6th night, I realized the cabin was done teasing. It wanted me fully inside its game, and every sound, every shadow, every shifting board made it clear that I wasn't just a visitor anymore. I was part of its arithmetic, a number it had been waiting to claim. The day had offered no comfort. The fog never burned off, and when I stepped outside, the bottle tree hummed in 6-beat patterns without wind, each note vibrating in my teeth like a warning disguised as a hymn. The footprints in the mud had returned too, clearer now, circling the porch in deliberate loops, always stopping at the 6th board of the steps before vanishing back into the laurel. Inside, the Bible had found its way open again, this time showing no words at all, only graphite spirals and angled symbols carved so deep into the page that the paper tore, and at the bottom was a drawing of stairs, 6 again, always 6, the last step shaded darker, waiting. I told myself I wouldn't look at the trapdoor, wouldn't let the smell crawl into me, but when I sat at the kitchen table, the floor trembled beneath my boots like something was moving inches below, slow as breath, deliberate as counting. The salt ring I'd made around the bed had begun to crust over, the grains clumping together as if they had absorbed moisture from a mouth that wasn't mine. And when I tried to reinforce it, the jar was empty. That was when the first knock came, not from the walls this time, but from inside my chest, a hollow echo that made my ribs vibrate, each thud syncing with my heartbeat until I couldn't tell which was mine. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The 6th knock came from the window, and when I turned, the glass showed me not my reflection, but another version of myself, pale, eyes too wide, holding up 6 fingers and smiling with teeth that weren't aligned like mine. I stumbled back into the salt ring, clutching the useless jar, whispering my name again. But the other me whispered it too. Perfect, taunting, like a voice played back on a broken recorder. The fire in the stove coughed once, flared, then guttered low, and I dropped to my knees feeding at scraps, paper, wood, anything that would burn, because I knew if it went out, the thing under the boards wouldn't need knocking anymore. Then the radio bled static, and the child's voice returned, not spelling this time, but counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, pausing with hungry silence before 6, waiting for me to answer. And against every ounce of willpower I had left, my lips parted and whispered the word 6. The walls shuddered, the floorboards bulged, and the trapdoor blew open like lungs gasping for air, the smell of soil and iron flooding the room. And from that pit, a staircase of vertebrae rose, pale and glistening, forming 6 clean steps climbing into nowhere. I swear I saw movement at the top, something waiting, something bending itself to fit through, and the bottle tree outside screamed with every throat at once, 6 notes over and over until the glass shattered in a burst of sound. I threw the Polaroid into the fire like an offering, and the flame swallowed it with a hiss. But before it burned, I saw the man's face change, his smile widening, his fingers holding up 6, and beside him, a second figure appeared. Me. The cabin had doubled me, mirrored me, written me into its arithmetic, and now it wanted me to climb those steps. My legs twitched like they belonged to someone else, urging me toward the trap door, and it took everything I had to drop to the floor, press my back against the stove, and scream my name until my throat bled, hoping it was enough to remind myself that I wasn't the ghost reflection in the glass. But deep down, I already knew. I was being counted, and sooner or later, the cabin always finished its equation.
By the 7th night, the cabin wasn't just closing in, it was inside me, and every breath felt borrowed, every thought dragged through a filter I didn't own, as though the place was trying to teach me its language one syllable at a time. The day had blazed past without a sun, just a dull gray ceiling that pressed low over the trees, and the woods felt rearranged, wrong, paths leading back to the porch no matter which way I walked, as if the world itself had decided I belonged to that house. Inside, the stove burned weak, every log shrieking too quickly, and the Bible refused to close no matter how many times I slammed it, its pages flipping open again to that same torn sketch of 6 stairs, the final one shaded so black it looked like a hole in the paper. The radio was worst. It no longer needed my hand to turn the dial, just hissed alive on its own, a choir of voices counting in unison, each one my voice, some lower, some higher, some older, all stopping on 6 with a laugh that wasn't mine. When the first knock came, I didn't even flinch because by now I knew it was just the start of their game. But then the knocking multiplied, 6 points at once, door, wall, window, floor, ceiling, trapdoor, beating like a heart I was trapped inside. The salt circle cracked under the weight of the pounding green scattering like dry rain, and for the first time since I'd arrived, I felt the cold fingers of something brush my ankle from the open space beneath the bed. I leapt back, fumbling for the fire, but the flames sputtered into blue tongues that barely lit the room, and in that dim light the walls shifted, their timber grain warping into ridges, valleys, and finally into faces. Dozens of them, eyes opening, mouths stretched wide, all mouthing the same word in silence. 6. I shouted back my own name like a shield, Trevor Canning, but the faces whispered it too, perfect, mocking, until I couldn't tell if I was echoing them or they were echoing me. Then the trapdoor yawned open and the staircase of bone rose again, higher this time, each vertebrae gleaming wet, as though freshly carved. Now the top was not a shadow, but a figure, me. Not pale this time, not distorted, but me, whole and alive, smiling down at calm eyes, raising 6 fingers in a slow wave. My body betrayed me, legs moving without permission, carrying me toward the open door on the floor. The air reeked of vinegar and iron, thick and choking, and the bottle tree outside screamed itself to pieces, glass bursting like gunshots. But none of it mattered because all I could hear was the counting. Hundreds of voices inside the walls, all mine, counting down to the number I could never escape. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I stopped at the trapdoor, toes on the edge, staring down at the staircase, and the other me extended a hand, patient, certain, like he had been waiting my whole life. My chest heaved, my throat burned, and I screamed my name one last time, hoping to break the pattern, but the sound that came out wasn't my voice, it was his, calm and steady, as if he'd stolen it completely. For a heartbeat, I leaned forward, ready to step down, ready to be completed, and that was when the stove exploded behind me, the iron door bursting off in a spray of sparks, the fire roaring higher than I'd ever seen, so hot it seared the skin of my back. The light slammed into the room, blinding, and in that instant the other me flickered, his smile collapsing, the staircase shaking like bones about to collapse. The trapdoor slammed shut hard enough to rattle the teeth in my skull, and I collapsed to the floor, coughing, clutching the empty salt jar, too weak to move. But even as the flames steadied, even as the pounding in the walls eased, I knew this wasn't victory. It was just a reprieve, and the cabin wasn't finished. It had counted me, marked me, and all it needed was one mistake, one gap, one night without salt or fire, and it would take me down those stairs for good.
When morning finally came, it didn't feel like salvation. It felt like a loan I knew I'd never be able to repay. Because the cabin wasn't gone, the voices weren't gone, and I could feel in my bones that I was only being allowed to leave on its terms, not mine. The air outside was heavy with fog, but thinner than the choking dark I'd lived in all night. And when I opened the door, the clearing looked almost normal. Snow crusted on the roof, frost painting the trees, the bottle tree broken and glittering in pieces across the ground. But my eyes kept searching for proof of what I'd endured, and the world refused to give it. No footprints in the snow, no crack in the porch boards, no trapdoor in the kitchen when I went back to look, just smooth planks that creak like any old floor. For a moment, I wondered if I had gone mad, if the sleepless nights and mountain silence had swallowed me whole and left me hallucinating, but then I found the Polaroid lying on the mantel again, perfectly unburned, the man still standing there in his coat, smiling, now holding up 6 fingers as though he'd always been that way, and I understood the cabin didn't erase its work. It rewrote it, shifted it, made it part of the story you could never scrub clean. I packed in a hurry, stuffing clothes and notebooks into my bag, hands trembling as I stepped over the faded salt stains on the floor, and when I closed the door behind me, I heard the latch click by itself, a soft sound that told me the cabin wasn't angry. It was patient, because it knew I'd carry it with me no matter how far I drove. The road out seemed shorter, impossibly so, and when I glanced at my watch, it was still stuck on 3:06, as if time inside me hadn't restarted. At the first gas station I reached, the woman behind the counter took one look at me, muddy, pale, shaking, and asked how long I'd been there. 6 nights, she guessed, like she already knew the number. I almost corrected her, almost told her it had only been 7 days, but the words died in my throat, because what if she was right? What if I hadn't just spent nights in that cabin, but years? I muttered something and laughed, but even now I can still feel the weight of those knocks inside me, as though my ribs are hollow boards waiting for the next counting to begin. I've tried to sleep in motels, in apartments, even on friends' couches, but it doesn't matter. The salt never sits right, the fire never burns long enough, and sooner or later I hear it again, gentle and patient, 6 knocks at the edge of my bed. And I think back to the note that welcomed me, written in a desperate hand: circle your bed, keep the stove lit, close the Bible if it's open, answer only on 6. I thought those rules belonged to the cabin. Now I know they belong to me, wherever I go, because once the mountains count you, they don't forget. So if you ever find yourself on some lost road in Appalachia, map frozen, fog closing in, and you see a cabin slouched in the clearing with a port swing that moves though there's no wind, I have only one warning: don't stay, don't open the door, don't touch the key under the horseshoe, because the place remembers, and if you let it, it will count you too. And if you ever hear knocking, and you find yourself whispering the numbers without meaning to, then God help you when you reach 6, because that's when the real story begins.